Joins us to bring a common sense approach to money in a world of total insanity. Let's welcome Tony D'Angelo.
I'm listening to Tony's intro again, and I'm saying, man, this guy has evolved on the show into something much more spectacular. But Tony D joins us each and every Tuesday. Not that his real persona isn't spectacular in its own right. I mean, he's sort of become a Clark Kent of sorts, right? He's a mild-mannered money man during the day, and he's a crime fighter at night, and we get a chance to talk to him each and every Tuesday. Tony D'Angelo, good morning.
Glorious to God, Lee Elci, trying to do my best. Good morning, everybody. Proud to be among you.
How are you?
I am okay, and I'll tell you who really deserves the praise today is our fans, our listeners, their friends, and I want to thank everybody, what I like to call the power of the show and the power of full power radio, because last Tuesday we talked about the calamitous conversion of M&T Bank and People's Bank that has some incredible overtones. We're going to get into that today. And I made the statement. You had asked me. You said, what can somebody do? I said, well, really, with a non-functioning government and an attorney general who's been bought off, or a government's been bought off by a $20 million charitable bribe to a charitable foundation, you're not going to see a heck of a whole lot. Well, there was a groundswell. And 2 days later, Attorney General William Tong started complaining. Pretty much all he was doing was wolf tickets because it's part of the deal is, you really can't get out there and, start ripping and tearing and fighting and all this other kind of stuff. Perhaps if it gets that bad along the way, maybe he breaks his promise. But I am firmly convinced, firmly convinced that it was people who say, oh, yeah, this is the job of the Attorney General, and they peppered it. And then on Friday, Comrade Dick Blumenthal came out and doing his old AG routine, talking about it. And I mean, we kind of like woke up the dead here. So I want to thank everybody for going out. And I keep saying this. I keep telling everybody. People bring me stuff. It's like, Tony, can you help me? It's like, well, yeah, I'm doing my best to help myself, and some days I fail. And I'm happy to help whosoever. But it's like each one, reach one, teach one. You got to go and do it yourself. Here, a whole lot of people did. And I've got to believe that this mess, this incoherent, garbagey, whatever you want to call it, which some are calling, the worst bank conversion in history, is going to get a little bit better because people spoke up. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to these people. I'm grateful to these show. This show, I'm grateful to you, Lee Elci. That's who deserves the praise today.
Yeah, there's something not strange. There's something really satisfying when that happens, when you do something and then there's a direct positive result from that, right? I mean, whether it's this or something, even if it's small and it changes somebody's life for the better, it's great. Like if I can hook a citizen up with a politician, and that politician can actually help that person
do something.
Yeah, whether it's a pothole or a health care bill, there's some satisfaction with that. It's really great. So good.
And I was raised, to help those in need. That was my mother to me. Because she would tell me, you will have your hour of need. So I hope I'm sowing some goodwill along the way for whatever I can do. But it's just an example of what focused people can do, and that gave me a bump and a jolt, and I'm pleased with that.
That's good. That's really good. All right, you want to go to energy?
Well, actually, let's stay on the bank thing for a little bit if we can. Now, if I start my usual function of calling the balls and the strikes, I want to revisit some affirmations concerned with this people's merger. Listening to your monologue, the horrible things that are happening with children, that was not my understanding of how children should be raised, and still is not. I believe in a free America. I believe in that. People should do what they want to do. I believe in a safe America. But rather than making a political statement, when you come down, whatever you want to call it, normal, understood political ideologies, what parties stand for. Maybe they meet in the middle, but they have things that don't really mesh. In my observation, I was always of the understanding that Republican politicians and independent politicians were the party of business facilitation, practicality, low taxes, safety, and things like that. And that goes back to, probably when I started to get interested in this in the days of Richard Nixon. And I hear a lot about bread and butter and kitchen table issues, and what amazes me is you can't get more bread and butter and kitchen table than your ability to bank and pay your bills and things like that. That's like buying a loaf of bread. Deal with a bounce check. We all have. Now we've got 3 offices of signature offices, sensitive offices: Senate, the Attorney General, and the Governor. And I don't see anybody, Lee Elci, I don't see anybody yelling and screaming and throwing tomatoes about really what is the worst bank conversion in history. And conversely to that, again, I got to call the balls and strikes. I want to know policy. I want to know what you're going to do so this mess does not happen to Connecticut citizens again. And believe me, it ain't hard. I mean, it's very easy to look at a disaster and say, well, the next time we're going to get the gasoline, we're going to keep it away from the cow and the matches. I mean, that's how simple this is. And I just don't get it. It is just... If you're talking politically, it is just such a cookie. I mean, it is an unbelievable cookie. But I want to know, from my standpoint, living in this state and working in this state and transacting in this state, how are you going to do it better? I had a friend. I have a very good friend who runs a nonprofit on a shoestring. Long story, but he, called me on Sunday because he was actually my first boots on the ground with this People's M&T thing. And I said, maybe a week before it happened, we shall see. We shall see what will happen. And he gave me everything soup to nuts. And his words to me were, Tony, when am I going to see, and he deals with a lot of the political figures, I said, Tony, when am I going to see change? When am I going to see something marketable? He says, I understand the world I'm living in. I understand what it's like. I understand the flaws. I can deal with the flaws, but there's the known of the bad and the unknown. And I'm like, this is just such a bright line. It is just so... I mean, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I need to be put away. But I'm like, banking is fundamental. And I'll give you another one. Kevin Rennie on, I guess it was Saturday in the Hartford Courant, did a very nice piece on the merger and a teller in People's Bank hugging a customer in this total disaster. But Mr. Rennie made a couple of statements about, well, what we need is better regulation. And what we need is, better training. Well, we talked about the training last week about what goes on in corporate America today and how people are educated and how they communicate and things like that. That's another segment for another time. Believe me, I've got a bunch of that. But the other thing is regulation. I challenge anybody, go to Google and put in the Connecticut Department of Banking, and you're going to see temporarily closed. I mean, you have no regulators, for crying out loud, in this bank merger, so you have nobody over there to do anything. And I'm like, back to the politicians, or just back to general thing. How are you going to do this better? I mean, to me, it's just so obvious. There's just so much to be done. You can't assume that, the damage that Ned Lamont has done to this state, I mean, that's just a part of it. But I can go on, but I know you have some thoughts.
Let me ask you a two-part question. One is your friend's charity that's run on a shoestring. Do you mind sharing that with everybody and what it is?
Yeah, he's been a guest actually on your show. Yeah. And when I've had him, Bobby Fiore, the Connecticut epilepsy advocate, we're the same year in Stamford. We are the same high school year. We had friends in common. We didn't know each other until, maybe about 10, 11, 12 years later. But we had a lot of friends in common. And, my dad had epilepsy. So, we have a lot in common. We chat frequently. And Bobby is just, Bobby has epilepsy, and he is just such an incredible inspiration. And you talk about me. This kid can stand a pencil on an ice cube. He's unbelievable.
Well, if you can get that info, we'd like to get it out there to everybody. That way, maybe somebody maybe wants to help out. Somebody who can send them a few bucks or something.
I will certainly do that. I'll send them the audio as well.
That's number one. Number two is you had mentioned all the different levels of banking, let's say, ineptness. And it's interesting because we've been having this conversation. As I've told everybody before, I've gone back to school, which is kind of neat. And I'm in this advanced macro class, and the conversation comes up about one kid pushes back really hard against the professor, and it's interesting because he doesn't believe in banks at all. And is there an alternative to the banking system the way it is now, Tony? I mean, you drop your money, you could drop it in your mattress, I guess, and not have to deal with it. But essentially, there really is no choice, right?
Well, you want to. How could I put it? If you want to buy a home, if you want to start a business, if you want to grow something, unless you have family wealth, unless you have generational wealth and health, you're going to have to go and borrow something. Now, what I do see, what I do know, there's levels of where you can borrow. There's and you can arrange this from top to bottom or bottom to top. There's, Tony Soprano and Paulie Walnuts. That is a real thing. It does go on. It's not in the movies. There's an intermediary thing, leaving aside payday loans. That's for working people. I think that is a good and necessary function. But there's also private capital or non-traditional capital, where investors will put money that they have. It's called hard money. You'll have somebody who wants to make right and do right, but they can't get a bank loan because they're quote-unquote not bankable. They had a bankruptcy, they had a tax lien, they settled that. The institutions think they're a bad risk, so they go to something like that. That is a very good and viable thing. You will pay higher interest, but it will get you to a point where you'll be able to come back and actually do something, and then you have traditional banking. So I think that the trouble of it is for many, many people, other than, Uncle Charlie lending you $15,000 to buy a car, what do? You go to a bank. It's based upon the need, or buy a home, or, many businesses run heavily on credit lines.
So they essentially they have control. They actually have complete control. Essentially, well, they do, but yet, our regulators and our government and our attorney general aspirants and candidates and things like that, that is what they should be paying attention to, right, to make the field level and fair. Anybody taking out a car loan expects to pay it back. They're not saying, well, I'm going to, unless you're really a rat, I'm going to take 2 payments and fill it up with gas and point it towards Mexico. You need them, and they actually exist on the margin, which is the difference between what they lend money out as opposed to what they give to you as a depositor. When interest rates go up, everything gets squeezed. People can't borrow and things like that. It hurts the entire economy. Right. Entirely lost on much of the political system. But yeah, you need them. There are alternatives, but we have control if we choose to deal with better banks. Better banks choose to be better, and bleeping politicians and regulators, and in some cases aspirants, do their job. Tony D'Angelo is our Tuesday guest at 7:05. We always enjoy his conversation. You can follow him for more at Tony D'Angelo 7. Do that on Twitter. All right, where are we going next?
Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to hold energy because that's another bread and butter issue that political parties and aspirants are missing by 9,000 miles. Your ability to drive a car, your ability to curse out a dealer, like I was talking about with you earlier, the dealer will remain nameless, and you can read about that on Facebook if you want to with me. But that is fundamental to your being an American. You don't want some bleeping politician telling you what car you should drive and where you should go. But I got into a very interesting discussion yesterday, and this is part of a longer discussion, everything is, about the trades of people in Congress. And we spent a lot of time here about financial ethics and what people have done and, Ned's deals and Ned deals and things like that. But there's a very, very, very good site which I will point people to, called Capital Trades. Capital is spelled O-L. And it is amazing to me. There are politicians that are trading in equity. Of course, these are policymakers. We'll get into blind trusts and what blind trusts are supposed to be subsequently. But the people that are in Congress who can more or less kind of elbow somebody and say, hey, what's happening here, or whatever the case may be, is you can see what their trading activity is. Now, Joe Courtney runs around saying people who are in Congress should not invest in direct stocks. They should invest in mutual funds. And Courtney, there's an article in the New London Day where he was caught in a snafu because there were some individual stocks he was involved with, and he said, "Oh, sorry, I'm not a perfect man. That's not me. That's my investment advisor. You can't pin that on me." Now, what the bright line here, Lee Elci and everybody and all my kids, is that an investment advisor is not a blind trustee. An investment advisor is someone you hire to manage money. And you can talk to them the way that you and I are talking. There is no restriction whatsoever. There's that whole thing about a year and a half ago with Kelly Loeffler, when she was in the Senate from Georgia, and she was saying, oh, my investment advisor. You could talk. There's no prohibition whatsoever. But there's one little curiosity here, which has got me. The New London Day did not mention this. Joe Courtney, a Democrat in the House in Connecticut on Capital Trades, during the period, and these are great reports, and somebody put a lot of work into this, from March 3rd of 2022 to April 13th of 2022, during the time when M&T was getting ready to merge with Peoples, made a purchase of Peoples United stock directly. And it's right there in the report. It's somewhere between 15,000 and 50,000. You kind of wish it was, like they were a little bit more specific. I don't think the guy's got a ton of money, but basically, I think he's anticipating here that there's going to be a jump on the stock, or somebody will swoop in and take over M&T, which often happens in the world of banking. One bank takes over another, and a bigger bank comes in and scarfs them both. But it's, is it a mortal sin? Is it a venial sin? I'll leave that for people in office. But it is a bank. It is a bank headquartered in this district. It is a direct equity. It is no big deal to tell your investment advisor, don't you dare touch any direct equity. And this stuff is going on. I think it speaks to the integrity of the man. But we see this thing happening. And it's like they say one thing and they do something else, and man, you got to be looking at every corner. But that's just something. You will see other trades. Larson pulled the same thing, Congressman Larson. Right. Blumenthal, he's got direct equities in his family as long as your arm, and they're all here to help us and serve us.
Yeah. Well, we got a minute. How would you fight that if you had?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to give that some thought for next week as we get into quote unquote the blind trust. But I think you're going to need to do something a heck of a lot more severe and a lot more stringent. When I was running blind trusts in the 90s for the Bush administration, the firm I was involved in, I had Nick Brady, who was Secretary of the Treasury, his blind trust. I can tell you, as far as this thought, and we'll get into this, Nick Brady and his blind trustee never communicated, never saw each other. At the very end of Nick Brady's tenure, when Bush the First was out of office, we handed Nick Brady an accounting, and we said, this is what they have done for you. You need an incredibly bright line, because there is just like Connecticut is just, Lamont hides behind a 3-year ethics plan that is so full of Swiss cheese, it's getting moldy. It's just, there are ways to do it. I have thoughts on that. We will share them, and I know we're running out of time.
Listen, kid, excuse me, always a pleasure, man. You do such a great job. Tony D'Angelo, follow him on Twitter, Tony D'Angelo7. All right, buddy, I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.
Now, good time in D.C. Be safe.
Thank you, bud. All right, we'll be right back.